Today, I am looking at The Adventures of Tintin, the Blue Lotus. Now, this is, depending on how you count them, either the fourth or the fifth book in the Tintin series. I say either the fourth or the fifth book because there's a book which should be number two, but it's no longer in print in English, and that is Tintin in the Congo. It's too politically incorrect to be printed in English nowadays, I guess. But we have Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, Book 1, Tintin in America, Cigar of the Pharaohs, the previous book, and now we are up to The Blue Lotus. Now, this was, according to Wikipedia, this was originally entitled Tintin in the Far East. In other words, this is Tintin in China. But it was renamed later for republication as Tintin in the Blue Lotus. The author, whose name I don't know how to pronounce, Herge, thought that it sounded more mysterious that way. And the Blue Lotus still conveyed images of China. The Blue Lotus, by the way, is a name of an opium den, which figures prominently in this story. So this one opens up with a little historical note, which the other Tintin books did not have. So this is something that's a little bit interesting. So it says this was first published in Brussels in 1934 and 1935 over a course of a couple years because, like all the other Tintin adventures, it was originally serialized in newspapers. But the story itself is set in 1931. So at that time, Japanese troops were occupying parts of the Chinese mainland and Shanghai, the great seaport at the mouth of the Yangtze Kiang, possessed an international settlement, a trading base in China for Western nations administered by the British and Americans. Herge based his narrative freely upon the events of the time, including the blowing up of the South Manchurian Railway, which led to further incursions by Japan into China, and ultimately to Japan's resignation from the League of Nations in 1933. So all of those events are portrayed or alluded to here in this comic. Now, I mentioned in my first review, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, that one of the reasons I'm trying to do these in order is because I've discovered that there's an internal chronology to them. And sure enough, this one picks up right where the previous one had left off. So the previous one had left off with Tintin, the guest of this guy. Who is this guy again? Maharaja or something? The Maharaja. So him and his son are hosting Tintin. And as well as the mystery from the previous book, again, the previous book being Cigars of the Pharaohs, was unresolved. We never caught the leaders of the gang, and there was a mysterious poison which was shot through by darts, which would make people go crazy. And the antidotes to that poison had not been found. So the people who had gone crazy in the previous book were still crazy. Now, those people specifically do not pop up in this book again. But the problem of the poison darts pops up again. So, there are, as the story progresses, there are a few more connections to the Cigars of the Pharaohs. So, yeah, you would want to be reading these in order. This one is a continuation of the story from the Cigars of the Pharaohs. It's a continuation, and yet it's obvious why this is in a completely separate book, because right from the first few pages, Tintin goes to China. So there's a very distinct change in the geography. And the plot is a continuation, but at the same time, there's a new antagonist here, a Japanese guy. What was his name again? Matsuhiro, or something like that, who becomes the main antagonist, who is always trying to get Tintin. So, yeah, this book has been the most interesting Tintin book I've read so far. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. This series started out pretty terrible with Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, but as I've been mentioning all along, Wikipedia and everyone else seems to agree that the series gets better as it goes on. So Tintin in America was a little bit better. Cigars of the Pharaohs was starting to get pretty interesting. And then the Blue Lotus was even better. And I had my hopes up that the series would just continue to get better and better from here on out, except after reading this, I went to Wikipedia to read the Wikipedia article on it. And Wikipedia said that a lot of people say like the Blue Lotus is one of the best Tintin stories ever, or like a masterpiece. So possibly that means this is as good as it's going to get. Which is fine. I mean, this is plenty good. It has its flaws, but it also has a lot of really interesting things about it. I don't know. Why don't I start with the flaws first? So, I guess the biggest problem is this is written for children. And I know that's obviously not a flaw, is it? That's just who the intended audience was. When I started reviewing comic books on this channel, I started off reviewing three comic books which were more modern and written for more mature audiences. But that has not always been the history of comics. Back in the 1930s, they were considered distinctly a kid's entertainment. I don't know why I allowed myself to forget that momentarily. I guess possibly because it's been so long since I've read comic books at any length. But yeah, the character development, the dramatic tension, everything like that, it's not that much better than the level of a cartoon. In addition to that, I'm pretty sure that because this was serialized in newspapers, it lends itself to the very random nature of the plotting. And again, it's much improved on the previous books. And there is an overarching plot covering the whole thing. But within that overarching plot, there's just a series of random adventures. So Tintin is attacked. He escapes. Then just a couple panels later, there's a new danger. He gets attacked. He escapes. So then he's in a new place. And then all of a sudden, there's a new danger. It's just kind of one escapade happens after another, all kind of under this overarching plot. But now again, I'm guessing this must be a result of the fact that this appeared in newspapers. I'm not actually sure if this was a newspaper strip or if it was like a newspaper double page supplements. It's not actually clear from this book how this would have originally been laid out in newspapers. And according to Wikipedia, this was revised several times over anyways. Some of the art was revised. It wasn't originally in color when it first appeared in the newspaper, so I don't know if there's any reason to think that the panels would have been exactly the same as they would have been in the newspaper. But anyways, so it has its charm, but I don't know. It would be similar to Dick Tracy or Little Orphan Annie or another 1930s comic that was appearing in newspapers at the time. Tintin, of course, was a Belgium comic instead of an American one, but the same type of flavor. Okay, so now that I've got that out of my system, now that those are the criticisms, there's a number of interesting little details about life in Shanghai in the 1930s that make this really interesting, or life in China in general. So Tintin, he arrives here, and he's in Shanghai near the European area, and he's taking a rickshaw, which bumps into an American man. It says, dirty little Chinaman to barge into a white man. Tintin sticks up for the Chinese man, brute, which causes this confrontation. And then the American guy goes into the Occidental Private Club. Oh, by the way, it's nowhere said in the comic that he's American. But I think the Wikipedia article indicates he's an American. Apparently he pops up in another comic, I'm not sure. According to Wikipedia, this guy definitely pops up in a later comic. But anyways, I'm getting distracted by all these factoids I learned from Wikipedia. Anyways, he goes into the private club where he meets the other Europeans, and he complains about how he can't beat up the natives anymore. What's the world coming to? Can't we even teach that yellow rabble to mind their manners now? It's up to us to civilize the savages. We soon won't have any control at all, and look what we've done for them, all the benefits of our superb Western civilization. So obviously this is a little bit over the top. But the general tone of this reminds me very much of the conversations in the club scenes from George Orwell's Burmese Days, and to a lesser extent, A Passage to India by, who was that by again? E.M. Forster? Both of which books also contain Europeans and Asian nations who have their own private club, where they have conversations that are similar to this. Orwell and E.M. Forster are a bit more subtle, but this is definitely the general tone of it. It's up to us to civilize the savages. We soon won't have any control at all. Look what all we've done for them. That's very much the general tone. So, yeah, that's interesting. It's also interesting in this Tintin book because these books have not been very politically correct up until now. And in fact, as I already mentioned, there's one book in the series that's not even printed anymore, Tintin in Congo, because apparently it had a very patronizing view of the natives and a very pro-Belgium colonial view of that. But according to Wikipedia, the author's views were changing at this point in his history. He was getting a little bit out of his far-right Catholic circle. And also according to Wikipedia, there was a priest who found out that Tintin's next adventure was going to be in China. And this priest was in Belgium, but he was teaching a bunch of Chinese exchange students. I don't know. Chinese people who were studying in Belgium. So he mentioned to the author, Herge, he said, I know you're going to make a strip about China. A number of my Chinese students really love Tintin. He said it would be a mistake to do all these stereotypes about China in them. And Herge actually got paired up with one of the guy's students who later became one of his good friends. Sorry, at the time became one of his good friends, and taught him all stuff about China. And so this book um, is trying to dispel stereotypes about China, which seems quite progressive in the 1930s. Here's Tintin talking to his friend Chang, and apparently this friend Chang is based on the Chinese person who Herge became friends with. It says, but Chang, all white men aren't wicked. You see, different people don't know enough about each other. Lots of Europeans still believe that all Chinese are cunning and cruel and wear pigtails, and are always inventing tortures and eating rotten eggs and swallows' nests. The same stupid Europeans are quite convinced that all Chinese have tiny feet, and even now little Chinese girls suffer agonies with bandages designed to prevent their feet developing normally. They're even convinced that Chinese rivers are full of unwanted babies thrown in when they are born. So you see, Chang, that's what lots of people believe about China. They must be crazy people in your country. Now, apparently, these are all stereotypes that the author Herge had believed himself, again, according to Wikipedia, before he got corrected by his Chinese friends. But now he's on a mission to correct them in other people. Although that part about eating swallows' nests, I don't know about China, but that certainly is true in Vietnam. They really, there is a special type of bird's nest which is considered a delicacy here. So I guess just because it's a stereotype doesn't always mean it's not true. Might be the lesson from that. I don't know what the lesson from that is. But anyway. And then there are a lot of different interesting things going on here with the real history of that time. So, I mean, as we mentioned in the historical footnote, the incident where the Japan blew up the railroad and tried to blame it on Chinese bandits is here. According to Wikipedia, author Herge moved the location of this slightly to make it closer to Shanghai. Of course, it's all historical fiction anyways. Tintin wasn't actually there. But, based on a real incident, which leads directly to Tokyo using its propaganda, and then a scene here in the League of Nations, where the Japanese guy is saying, and once again, Japan has fulfilled her mission as guardian of law and civilization in the Far East. If we have been forced to our utmost regret to send troops into China, it is for the good of China herself, the League of Nations. So here's the main Japanese antagonist. You can see, of course, he's got the buck teeth, which was a stereotypical way of portraying Japanese at the time. I think that that actually comes from Tojo, right? Is that where that 1930s thing comes from? Because Tojo actually did have some prominent teeth. But at any rate, it soon became a stereotypical way of caricaturing Japanese people. So you can still criticize some stuff here if you want to. And that's not getting into all the cruelty that the Japanese army is portrayed as here. Although, again, I mean, we get into this debate here, huh? Arguably, they were very cruel at that time. But if the Japanese come off bad, the Americans and British in the international settlements do not come off any better. So here's that American guy that was so infuriated at Tintin before. He tries to sell Tintin out to the Japanese. But the Japanese get the chief of the international settlement. Oh, yeah, here it is. A chap called Gibbons from a large American company. Okay, so sorry, it does say in the text he's American. But anyways, Dawson, the chief of police of the international settlement, they get him to try and arrest Tintin. And we even get into some of the interesting politics of Shanghai at the time. And I really have no idea how accurate any of this is or was. And the author Herge never went to China, so I don't know how accurate his research was. But here's Tintin. He's coming. He gets to the Shanghai, the international part of Shanghai, where there's a guard who says, "Halt, your papers." He says, "My identity papers? I'm afraid I haven't got them with me. But my name's Tintin and sorry, nothing doing." "But look, you can see I'm a European." "Nothing doing." "What's the problem?" "The boy hasn't any papers, sir." "Please." "No arguing, Sonny. Must have proper papers to enter the settlement." So, yeah, I don't know if they were really that strict. I've been living in Asia for the past several years myself. And, one of those little thoughts that occurs to me every now and again, if I were to completely lose my passport somehow, how much trouble would I have getting into the U.S. Embassy or, getting back into America? Would it be like, "Look, you can obviously see I'm not Vietnamese"? Would they be completely reasonable about it, or would they be like, "Nothing doing, no papers, you can't get in"? I don't know. It's something I think about from time to time. Hopefully, I'll never put that to the test. But they won't let Tintin into the international settlement, so he has to steal a bike to get in, or no, wait, he does the old look up trick. Like I said, this is a comic made for children, so these are the points in the comic where it's very obvious you're dealing with a child's sensibilities. So talk about the interesting stuff as well as the not so interesting stuff in this review. Oh, he hides out in the theater, where there's another callback to the previous adventure. He says, "Look, Snowy, do you remember in Arabia, Mr. How do you say this? Rastapopoulos shooting his film? We interrupted that scene." There's a little star there, so you go down to the footnote here, "See Cigars of the Pharaohs." So yet another reason why you want to be reading these stories in order. Although, sorry, little digression. When you walk into the library and you look at these covers, there is no indication anywhere in the book that there's any kind of chronology to this. I mean, I guess they're arranged in chronological order here, but even here, it's not. You wouldn't know that this is supposed to be the chronological order. You could just think that these are all the adventures. So, the more I get into this series, the more I appreciate the fact that you want to read them in order. But also, it seems to be that the publishers are selling these as just like random individual adventures. And I guess, you could still read them individually. You'd miss a few references, but you can put up with that. So yeah, he meets his old friend Rastapopoulos. It turns out to be the kingpin. Sorry, spoilers. And other people he meets are Thompson and Thompson, the bumbling police detectives, who are now working in Shanghai, and had become friends with Tintin in the previous comic after trying to arrest him for most of the comic. But now they're right back to arresting him, although at least now they acknowledge that he's a friend. A rotten job, just our luck, ordered to arrest a friend. But then after making that complaint, they again function as more of Tintin's antagonists, with a lot of random stuff going on. Yeah, and then at the end, it's wrapped up. And then we go back to the international politics scene where yeah, Japan is accused of having organized the attack on the Shanghai Nanking Railway, and as a result, resigns from the League of Nations. Now, again, I'm not really an expert in any of this, so I mean, I know that Japan definitely did resign from the League of Nations at this time, but I'm not sure if this was directly in response to the League of Nations saying that the Shanghai Nanking Railway attack was planned by the Japanese. I don't know, but this is the way it happens in the comic book, based on the actual resignation of Japan from the League of Nations. Yeah, so a lot of interesting things to say about this. And I don't know, sorry. Getting back to some maybe complaints here. Here's Tintin earlier in the comic, captured by the international settlement. And he says, by the way, that little ragamuffin you brought in last night, did you know he clouted one of your chums? If I were you, I'd give him a spot of corrective treatment. Very good, sir. So these are all three Sikhs. And I don't know what they're doing in Hong Kong, other than, I mean, I know that the British in, what's the word? They brought in Indians to work in Singapore and Malaya. So I guess, did they do the same thing in Hong Kong? Sorry, this isn't Hong Kong, is it? Shanghai. In Shanghai? I don't know, maybe they did. Although, according to Wikipedia, in the original, when this was originally published, these were three Scotsmen. And then they got changed into Sikhs in the later edition. Why they made that change, Wikipedia didn't say. I don't know if anybody out there knows. So they're going to beat up Tintin. You hear the door clacking. Here they come. And then clang, bang, thump, zing, boom. Still, I hope they don't knock him about too much. Next scene, they're ordering an ambulance. Yes, sir, an ambulance to St. James Prison. Right, I'll send one along. Ambulance comes, and then we get to the punchline. It's actually the Sikh guards who are in the hospital because Tintin beat up all three of them. Now, that's not bad as a punchline. But it does create questions about what is going on with Tintin. Now, there have been some hints in the previous books that Tintin was quite handy with his fists and could handle himself in a physical confrontation. Nothing, I think, against three burly strongmen before. So I know. I shouldn't think too much about it because it's just a cheap joke. But it does make you wonder every single other time that Tintin gets into a confrontation. You'd think, well, what does he need to worry about? He's Tintin. He's like a He-Man. He can beat up anybody. Beat up 3 men at once. Although, to be fair, I think, actually, the only times that Tintin appears to be in any danger in these comics is when someone's got a gun trained on him. If it's just man versus man, Tintin seems quite capable of resorting to fisticuffs. So maybe that's consistent. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it also brings up a question that I've been asking myself and asking in these videos ever since I started this review series is, how old is Tintin? So I actually looked this up on Wikipedia. I mean, I should have looked it up on Wikipedia ages ago, but I've been reading the entries for the individual adventures, and I didn't go to Tintin's character profile. So I went to Tintin's character profile on the Wikipedia page, and it said he is a young man, somewhere between 15 and 19. So that's quite a range, isn't it? And I mean, fair enough. You look at him there and you say, okay, well, he could pass for anywhere between 15 and 19, I guess. But that ambiguity in the Wikipedia page must indicate that nowhere in the comics does the author ever attempt to define what Tintin's age is. He obviously looks young, but he's got a job, works as a reporter. He's depicted as drinking alcohol in some of these comics. Yeah. Anyways, I think I've rambled on long enough about this one. Definitely enjoyed reading this. And we'll be continuing on to the Broken Ear next.